would be over in an instant. Shen Qinqiu's pupil contracted. Right as Diera's strike came down, by curious coincidence, a ceiling beam broke. If Shen Qinqiu had still been reading Proud Immortal Demon Way, upon seeing this described, he definitely would have thrown down his cell phone and started screaming curses. The system had already declared it so. The one unbreakable, ironclad rule was that the protagonist could not die, meaning that as soon as the protagonist's life was threatened, a death flag would be triggered. Shen Qinqiu purposefully goaded Diera into attacking Luo Binghe in order to take advantage of this rule. He just used someone else to do his dirty work. Admittedly, this was rather unscrupulous, but Luo Binghe probably hadn't been in real danger, and if Shen Qinqiu hadn't done this, he would have had to pay the price himself. In the long term, even if he threw Luo Binghe under the bus this one time, there would be more chances to farm his favor in the future. However, to the great master airplane shooting towards the sky, what do you think of your readers' IQs? How could a ceiling beam suddenly snap in a perfectly fine, splendid, and beautiful new mansion? Even if it was to let the protagonist escape with his life, this twist was still downright contrived. What's the difference between this and a third-rate melodrama where the male and female protagonists are just about to marry when they're suddenly hit by a car in a tragic twist ending? Downvote. The practically brand new ceiling beam fell straight down and just happened to coincidentally smash into Diera, smacking them flat onto the ground and rendering them unable to get up. The beam also coincidentally smashed into the pillar Luo Binghe and Ning Yingying were bound to, causing it to slant. Ning Yingying had already fainted from shock, but after some struggle, Luo Binghe's ropes had, further coincidentally, loosened. After this string of coincidences, Shen Qinqiu was still on the ground and bound by the immortal binding cable, watched as Luo Binghe stared, unmoving, at the fallen Diera in puzzled silence. Was this it? Just as Shen Qinqiu thought that, Diera overturned the ceiling beam and sprang up.
Shen Qinqiu!
They snarled, enraged.
The schemers of Changqiu Mountain are truly shameless and despicable. What sort of dirty trick did you just use to ambush me from behind like that?
Shen Qinqiu was in fact completely innocent. This had nothing to do with him, really. If anything, the chief culprit was actually Luo Binghe.
So you really were lying to me, trying to draw my attention away so you could sneak attack me?
Diera snapped, unforgiving.
Otherwise, why would a perfectly good ceiling beam come crashing down and just happen to smash into me?
They also had the wits to notice the parts of this scene that were illogical, so their IQ wasn't beyond saving. Shen Qinqiu was a little relieved. Diera sneered.
You thought this would be enough to stop me? Keep dreaming. The immortal binding cable can only be cut by an immortal sword. You can forget breaking it via any other means.
I just praised you, and you goofed up again. Don't reveal how to free the enemy, dear, Shen Qinqiu thought. Also, did Diera think that no one could see where they'd put Xiuya? They even specifically drew back their cloak to show its place on their hips and patted it. Shen Qinqiu couldn't contain his exasperation, and he took a chance to communicate a little with the system. System, I need to ask, are all the villains in this mold? To guarantee your ability to clear the beginner level quest, activating easy mode set the villain's IQ to below average. Oh, so not all bosses would be this easy to fumble through. Shen Qinqiu thought it was a bit of a pity, but he still smashed the like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up. This easy mode of yours is still a bit too user-friendly. Diera gritted their teeth.
I won't listen to you no matter what you say this time. Accept your death, Shen Qinqiu.
One last thing, Shen Qinqiu shouted. Sure enough, governed by easy mode, Diera stopped.
What last words do you still have?
Shen Qinqiu thought for a while. How does it feel to sleep with a 60-year-old coot? Diera was struck silent, but they were subsequently so enraged that their expression twisted, their entire body trembling. Luo Binghe took the chance to suddenly rush the demon from behind. He snatched Xiuya's sword from Diera's hip and drew the sword, filling the entire room with pure white light. A curved flash of silver and the immortal binding cable on Shen Qinqiu's body was neatly severed. Once more betrayed by the IQ loss of easy mode, the mini-boss Diera had completely ignored the existence of a living, breathing Luo Binghe standing right behind them. Diera cried out in fear.
This is impossible!
Enough. I'm not the listening type. I don't want to hear a rote analysis of the boss's true motives right before their death. The corner of Shen Qinqiu's mouth twitched, and he gathered all his spiritual power in his right hand, lashing out with a palm strike and smacking Diera in the chest. The demon flew back like a kite with a snapped string. This was the first time Shen Qinqiu had killed someone, but he didn't hold back, not even a little. First, because this was a book. Second, because this was a demon who'd killed countless people. And third, because if he didn't, he'd be the one who got killed. Shen Qinqiu gazed down at the horrible state of Diera. 4 limbs, twisted and broken, bleeding from the 7 facial apertures. He turned away, bombarding his brain with a barrage of his 3 reasons until they blocked out the screen of his mind. Striving to remain calm, he slowly stood and straightened, settled his heart and breathing, fixed his posture, and turned to Luo Binghe. Binghe, this must be your first time seeing someone eliminate demons and uphold justice, he said. Were you scared? Luo Binghe's still childish face was slightly pale. If you wish to uphold, you must eliminate, said Shen Qinqiu, composed. Luo Binghe gritted his teeth. His voice quivered. Shizun, if this disciple may be so bold as to ask just now. When the second half of the sentence didn't arrive, Shen Qinqiu spoke. You want to ask, if that ceiling beam hadn't suddenly come crashing down, what would be my plan? Shen Qinqiu had no choice but to suffer in silence. He yearned to tell Luo Binghe, don't worry, even the ceiling beam hadn't collapsed, perhaps the wall would have. Even if the wall hadn't, perhaps the pillar would have. Long story short, you definitely wouldn't have died. The boss definitely would have, and that's all there is to it. But he couldn't speak these words, so he could only adopt an unpredictable air and evade the question by changing the subject. If you are asking this, are you blaming your master? Luo Binghe shook his head. No, he said, his expression sincere. If this disciple could give up his life for Shizun, it would be an honor. Shen Qinqiu was shaken. This kid really was too much of a White Lotus. Then this master will promise you in kind, he said after thinking for a moment and settling on properly ambiguous words. Even if an accident befalls this master, no misfortune would come to you. This was an absolute truth. Even if Shen Qinqiu died 100 times, even 1,000 times, Luo Binghe, the protagonist with impervious plot armor, would go on living in perfect health. On this matter, I speak nothing but the truth. His voice resounded as he said this, his expression confident and collected, without the slightest hint of falsehood. When Luo Binghe heard these words, it was as if his life force had been ignited. The sunflower that had begun to wilt revived, full of renewed vigor. Holding Shouya's sword in both hands, Luo Binghe lifted the blade until it was even with his brows and presented it to Shen Qinqiu. Shizun, your sword. Shen Qinqiu grasped Shouya's sword, taking it from him. Internally, he wiped away his sweat. For now, this child was way too easy to dupe. He'd been thrown under the bus and frightened out of his wits, but a couple of words were all it took to restore him to full health in the blink of an eye. But in the future, he wouldn't be so easy to fool. The path to adulthood truly was tangled with thorns and suffering. Then a series of system notifications came at him like a succession of cannon blasts, sending Shen Qinqiu to cloud 9. Ning, ying, ying, favor increased. Protagonist, satisfaction, plus 50 points. Obtained high-level item, immortal binding cable, villain strength, plus 30 points. Completed beginner level request, plus 200 points. OOC feature unfrozen. From this point on, You have full command over the Shen Qinqiu accounts controls. Congratulations. Please continue to work hard. Shen Qinqiu had fallen a little in love with the sensation of these dramatic up and downs, the intense joys and sorrows. It was basically gambling. And now the OOC feature was unfrozen. From this point on, he could finally carry out the great and glorious task of clinging to the male lead's thighs. Upon returning to Changqiu Mountain, the first thing Shen Qinqiu did was ascend Qiongjing Peak, which was safeguarded by the sect leader, and report his work to Yue Qingyuan. Previously, Shen Qinqiu had thought that Yue Qingyuan's existence was basically that of a quest-giving NPC, but as soon as he entered the mountain gates, this impression disappeared without a trace. Shen Qinqiu had yet to enter the main hall when Yue Qingyuan descended upon him, leading a retinue of Qiongjing Peak's disciples to welcome him. They had just come face to face and smiled at each other, and hadn't yet even said anything, when Yue Qingyuan's right hand grasped Shen Qinqiu's wrist. Shen Qinqiu was instantly surprised. However, Yue Qingyuan made no further movements and instead examined him attentively through his pulse, even inserting a mild spiritual flow of his own to investigate Shen Qinqiu's. He realized then that Yue Qingyuan was only inspecting his spiritual circulation, and he relaxed. After a moment, Yue Qingyuan let go. He smiled and walked with Shen Qinqiu into the main hall. "How was the training?" His tone was like that of an elder brother, which made Shen Qinqiu remember his former self-two brothers. He felt a slight sorrow, but greater still was a comforting sense of warmth, to the point that even his dejected report came out cheery. Unsatisfactory." His disciples hadn't so much as glimpsed the Skinner demon's shadow. Speaking from the angle of disciple training, the trip really had been a bust. "No need to rush," said Yue Qingyuan. Shen Qinqiu nodded before suddenly changing the topic. Brother, I wish to go back to Qiongjing Peak and enter secluded cultivation within the Lingxi Caves." Qiongjing Peak was the head of the 12 peaks, and naturally it collected the essence of the heavens and earth. As for the Lingxi Caves, they were Qiongjing Peak's best location for cultivating, giving twice the results in half the time. Therefore, the sect's most senior members and outstanding disciples could request permission from the sect leader to enter the caves for secluded cultivation. Only with the sect leader's approval could they act upon this desire. If Shen Qinqiu wanted to enter seclusion in the Lingxi Caves, he was sure Yue Qingyuan wouldn't refuse. But the smile on Yue Qingyuan's lips froze a little, his expression changing slightly. Shen Qinqiu sensed something strange, but the strangeness flashed by quickly. "For the Immortal Alliance Conference?" Yue Qingyuan asked gently. "That's correct." It wasn't only because of the Immortal Alliance Conference, though. The incident with the Skinner demon had made Shen Qinqiu realize the importance of diligent cultivation. In this world, you only had the right to think about the future if you had the strength to meet it. After all, bosses wouldn't always be on easy mode and saddled with below-average intelligence. Before entering seclusion, Shen Qinqiu called over Luo Binghe and handed him an actual cultivation manual. "Why is Shi Zun giving this disciple a completely different manual?" Luo Binghe asked as he received it. "Your constitution is a little different, so you can't cultivate properly by following ordinary methods," Shen Qinqiu bullshitted solemnly. He didn't want to personally reveal the truth, that Shen Qinqiu had inspired Mingfan to give Luo Binghe a fake cultivation manual, even though eventually the truth would be exposed. As he stared after Shen Qinqiu's retreating back, Luo Binghe held that manual in both hands, his heart profoundly shaken. "Shi Zun has specially given this manual only to him." Shen Qinqiu glanced back a few times and saw Luo Binghe still standing there, dumbstruck. He rubbed at the spot between his brows and kept walking. He didn't know what Luo Binghe was thinking, but the boy was almost certainly thinking too much.